And so with that, I would like to invite our next speaker up, Ross Vrana, who again is the Vice President of Public Affairs at Hill+Knowlton Strategies.
Thank you. Oh, here we go. Great. Well, listen, I want to thank McGill and all of you very much for coming. I think having this kind of discussion at an academic setting is really good. It shows how Canada is moving along. As mentioned, I worked at Health Canada for 18 years, and part of my last job was dealing with this policy issue. And it's amazing to see from 2008, 2013, today, how this has really progressed. So thanks very much for that. The introduction here, what I want to remind people is, what government does, because my talk is about setting everything into context today for you on the legal side, what government is doing, what they intend to do. And this is obviously a big policy issue, but the whole idea of cannabis has been around and the government has been dealing with it essentially since 1999. And so it's been a big policy challenge for sure. And the courts have driven it largely today where we are on the medical side. And that's a very important distinction because the government never wanted to really take it on until they were forced to, whether that was a liberal or a conservative government. However, the opportunity is, thanks to the author of The Prince there, is that when you think about your times and today, where's that opportunity? And that's what this last Liberal government did in the election, saying we're going to now take it one step further and legalize it. So that really sets the context, right? This is a big issue. Canada is leading the world. We're not the first nation to legalize it. Uruguay is. But we are the first nation that's a G7 country to do it. And I think with the work that you guys are talking about, the academic work, the physician work, the research that's going on is going to be very important for this country in the coming years. So when we have a recreational and medical market, there's a number of numbers, thrown around, right? And the estimates on it, the industry writ large, because I want to make it very clear, there is no difference between medical cannabis or recreational cannabis. You can't go to a store when it becomes legalized and say, I want rec cannabis versus medical cannabis. It's the same product. How you use it is obviously going to be different, right? And the way the producers are going to have to grow it, ensure it meets all the standards, is going to be the same way whether it's for recreational or medical. Of course, as we've just heard, they will develop the strains based on a different market to a degree. So we're talking about maybe a $5 to $7 billion industry just strictly for cannabis, a huge number to contemplate, right? Beer and tobacco is larger, but when you think about the infused products, when we start thinking about 2019, where the government is committed to the fact that we're going to start seeing infused waters or creams or edibles, that market then starts to look at $12 to $22 billion. So really quite large. And we've got some estimates, and I've got some other stats in there. We're talking about a population of close to 600,000 on the recreational population, 500 metric tons. But what I want to leave you with when I start throwing all these numbers at you here is that these stats are largely estimates. No one knows for sure, even based on other models that happened in California, in the US, and in the States, Canada is going to be very distinct. So my view is we can give you some numbers, we can give you a baseline, but it's going to be a surprise for a lot of people come legalization. If we look at the market, the medical side of things, these numbers are a little bit more solidified because when I joined Health Canada, when we were in this area, back then, we maybe had about 15,000 patients. It skyrocketed quickly to 40,000, and then it's up to anywhere about 200,000 today. So when you hear the numbers, when you read the press, please take it with a grain of salt overall as to what the worth is going to be. But it's going to be worth something, that much we know. Okay, so if you look at the first quarter of this year, for all the licensed producers that are out there selling, it's about 35 kilograms of dried marijuana, okay? So it's a 34% increase, which is astounding when you think of the market and you think of the recreational market. And there are today, and if you want to keep track of it, every Friday, Health Canada comes out with a new number. There are 89 licensed producers. There are about another 300 to 200 applications in the department currently right now. So that number expected to keep on rising. Right now, Quebec, 4 licensed producers, and only one of them has their sales license. Okay, but companies are coming in. They are expanding, they are using it as a second site, and I'm sure David will be able to talk about that absolutely. Whereas in Ontario right now, there's about 44 to 45. So a big disparity. But that will change over time. There's no question about it. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. Oh, there we go. Let's talk about the legislation. Now, everybody has in their mind somehow that July 1st is going to be Cannabis Day when everything's going to be implemented. There is no way Canada Day is going to be Cannabis Day. That I can absolutely guarantee you. If you want to have a bet, I will gladly take your money on that. There's no question. The government has committed publicly, and they always said July 2018. And they've always given themselves, as politicians tend to do, an out, saying depending on how things pass in the House of Commons. And that's very true. Because now we're just hearing, again, I said, listen, there is no way the government can backtrack on this. They have to get this implemented because they will get hammered by the industry, by the advocates, by patients, by the rec side if they don't. But the wild card is now we have a Senate and there's a lot of independent senators in there that make up the majority. And so the recent discussions over just this last week are, well, maybe if there's a bit of a runway, it'll be maybe August or September. So theoretically, we're still in the summertime. But what Health Canada has just kind of recently said, and what we hear in Ottawa is that, okay, we're going to have the implementation date. That might be announced in June, July, but we need to give industry, we need to give physicians that runway to actually figure it out, right, to prepare for it. They know it's coming, but now you know what the real rules are. And of course, that includes provinces and municipalities. And, oh, sorry, this last little bit here on number 4, why is this so complicated? You would think it could be fairly straightforward. Well, these are just a series of all the acts and legislative regulatory instruments that the government has to consider and change. And trust me, as a former civil servant, that's no mean feat whatsoever. So that's what they're working at. That's what they're working at extremely hard. Okay, so the legislation, you know, when we think about that, what has the Bin government doing to date to solicit all of your views and to see what you want when cannabis becomes legal? Well, they had a task force. The Honourable Anne McClellan was the chair of that. She was a former federal Minister of Health, my Minister of Health, and I don't think she'll mind saying this. I remember discussions with her when she was there, as I was a junior analyst at the time, saying there's no way we're ever going to legalize cannabis. There's no way we're going to allow it to happen. Times have changed, clearly. And so they provided the task force. The government has taken that, and they have now started a large consultation exercise. The last period was about the proposed regulations as it looks on how they want this new industry to be formulated and what it means for the provinces. They are going to continue to consult. We saw in the news, you know, how the distribution on the tax regime is going to work with the provinces and the federal government. The feds get 25%, the provinces get 75%, a very smart political move to get everybody on side on the distribution thing, on the distribution angle of this whole situation. And what we continually hear is, in the degree it can break down between advocates who are saying you're not going fast enough, to police forces, those in law enforcement saying you're going too fast, to municipalities and the provinces who are somewhere in between, because that's a shifting dynamic overall. And this is the landscape that we're dealing with. So it's February now, so just think about what the next 3, 4, 5 months are going to bring. It keeps me employed, so I'm very grateful for that fact. Okay, the provincial distribution of cannabis. There's a very simple way to look at this, and this is what I find interesting. When you think about it, we live in a federation, obviously, right? And the great thing is, you know, Quebec, I go to the SAQ. In Ontario, I go to the LCBO. When I'm out in Alberta, it's a private liquor store. Well, guess what's happened with cannabis? It's the same kind of model that's being devised all across the provinces. The federal government is not going to put into place a national system. They've clearly made it a priority in the Cannabis Act, saying distribution, that's the province's headache. And so you can think of it this way, from east of Ontario, so that's Manitoba and all the western provinces, they are going to have a mix and match system of public and private, primarily private dispensaries. Ontario, Quebec, and the Atlantic provinces, generally they're going to be government controlled. So in Ontario, it's never going to be called this, but everybody's throwing it around. You're going to have the Cannabis Board of Ontario. You won't. The other thing they're very adamant about is none of this stuff is going to be co-located with liquor stores in any kind of venue. And the other thing that's consistent across the country that we know is that there will be a central government body coordinating it. So if I have a dispensary out in Manitoba, I can't just go to David and say, hey, can I have a ton of your best product? I have to go through the Manitoba Cannabis Board. They then will set out an RFP, which they've already done, and said, David, we would like you to apply to this because we like the Green Organic Dutchman. I hope that's a good commercial for your company there. And full disclosure, they're a client of mine, so ha-ha. So that's how the way to think about it, but the government still has a lot of interesting challenges ahead of them. So the thing is, when everybody says, well, we don't have enough time, what I agree with is I think we have to get something in place. And what I want the government, to really understand overall is that it's a policy that has to be adapted, it has to change. The answers are not going to be there when the implementation date comes. It's going to have to evolve as we learn more, since we are truly the global leaders in this entire industry. There's tremendous opportunity, there's tremendous challenges. So it's really adapt and understand, and the people at Health Canada will be busy for many, many years, as will the provinces. Because as you can see, I wanted to sort of give you some views. H&K, this is not a commercial, we do polling, and we do this quite regularly, and cannabis is obviously a very interesting area. So about 2 years ago, we said, what are Canadians' attitudes towards legalization? And the majority, in and around 55 to 60%, supported it, and said, we have to see this. It's crazy the way the system works. What's happened over time on our last poll, just before the holidays, that number dropped significantly to only 43%. So what does that mean? Does it mean the Liberals have guessed wrong? What I think it means, and the way we've interpreted the numbers when we looked at it, is now the reality is here. So people are a little bit nervous. And the reality is here because we're still, no matter how many conferences we have, no matter how many times the government goes out and speak, is we don't know what the hard and fast rules are. We haven't seen the bricks and mortars stores come up yet, other than the illegal ones, right? So there's this question that keeps on coming out about the research, about what's it really going to look like? Everybody still has this sort of question in their mind, which I think is good and bad. But what it puts on the government side of things, and again, which makes my life a little bit interesting, is, how do you have that discussion? Where are the politicians? Where are the civil servants on this? And they have to be more transparent, especially as we're ramping up, which I think they are doing gradually. But time is ticking. If you look at this, we then dove a little bit deeper on agree or disagree, and that's a simple sort of breakdown as to where Canadians are, whether they want a dispensary close by, a store close by, do they support it, what do they think about infused products, what do they think about dried cannabis, etc. And so those numbers always sort of continue to fluctuate. But again, the story for us is, you would think support generally would be higher, but it comes down to the fact that we need more information, and that information is coming. So, I was told I had 13 minutes. I'm going to conclude right now. I think, Canada, it's a major, major policy change. Certainly in my lifetime, I have not seen anything like this. You're all here today to understand a little bit more about it. I think Canada has a really interesting opportunity. We have heard about the risks and benefits of cannabis. I think that's a very fair discussion that has to keep on going. More research has to happen. There's a great opportunity for entrepreneurs. There's a great opportunity for medical science in this area. And I think globally, while I don't think it'll ever come to the point where Canada will go and somebody will be in Germany and say, I would love some BC Bud, please, at the restaurant, like we do with wine, for instance, we will have those new products, which I'm very excited about on the medical point, which I think, if it can help with opioids, is fantastic. And we're finally having, I would say, a grown-up discussion on this. But what has to happen is we have to have a clear understanding of both the risks and benefits overall. And I think we're finally getting there. So that's what I really enjoy about this industry. And so after that, I know discussions with my former colleagues at Health Canada, governments, primarily in Europe and in Latin America, are knocking on their door, and they want to know what Canada's doing. And collectively, a lot of people are looking at Canada to say, okay, how's this really going to roll out in a nation of close to 34 million people, the size of California, but where you've got a very central controlled federal regime linked with the distribution regime on the provinces. So thank you very much.